Well, good evening. Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Learn Live UAE. Tonight, we've got a fantastic episode lined up for you, but we are now on the cusp of, or on riding the wave, I guess, actually, following our Learn Live UAE conference on Friday. What an amazing day, Ollie, that was.
It was, yeah. I'm still in awe a little bit of the day itself, of all the great sharing by all of the fabulous speakers on the day. As well as, I know that behind the scenes you saw, the number of screens that I had set up, similar to you, had 2 or 3 screens on the go at once. So a bit blown away by that as well. But what a day, what a day.
Yeah, phenomenal. 20 different speakers, 3 keynote speakers from Kai Vasher to Mary Myatt to El Kingsley to all the other speakers in between 7 hours, 15 minutes. And believe me, I've lived them again because since Friday, I've been busy in Final Cut Pro, chopping all those videos up, ready to share them individually to add to our YouTube channel. And looking to share those, make it a bit more easy for everybody to access all those different things there. And something I'm really proud of, Ollie, and hat tip and kudos to you for generating such a broad and diverse range of presentations. It was great to see presentations in Arabic and from a real broad range of educators from the region. And that, hat tip to you for organising all of that, Ollie. So thank you so much. Absolutely brilliant day. But we're back onto our regular schedule. We've got our guest waiting patiently in the wings, ready to come on. Hi, everybody, to our live viewers as well. Long-time viewer, long-time sufferer, Neil Statham is joining us. He's in early for this one, and he's very much looking forward to tonight's show. So thanks for joining us for that, Neil. Fresh from his expose on Dubai Eye just on the weekend. I hope that went well for you, Neil. Just a few little shout outs before we bring in our guest this evening. So we got, I've been invited, Ollie and I, to do a live Learn Live UAE episode from the Guest EdTech Virtual Summit. So if you're keen to come along and get involved in that event, please do so by going to guestleaders.com and sign yourself up there. It's a great day with lots of different presentations and professional learning opportunities there, and panel interviews, things to help shape your vision for teaching and learning with or without technology via the virtual summit there being supplied by guests, which I understand is free to attend. So please do get yourself signed up for that. And Ollie and I are really looking forward to that as well. Don't forget as well that from our platinum sponsors at the conference, you can still access their classroom.cloud software for free for 3 months. And if you're a school in the Middle East or the MENA region, please do follow the classroom.cloud link to find out more about that special offer, so you can take that on board. And thanks to classroom.cloud for sponsoring this episode as well. Thank you very much indeed. So today's episode, Ollie, really excited to invite somebody who we both really respect in lots of different ways, from his writing, from his sharing, from his blogging, maybe not to his music. We'll dive into that a little bit later on. He's laughing in the green room already. And we're really excited to bring Mr. Tom Sherrington onto the show this evening to talk about all things teaching, learning, and leadership. Ollie, you've been getting a bit excited, haven't you?
I have, yeah, because as you've said, both of us hugely respect Tom for everything that he does, what he writes, what he shares, and really feel like he talks a lot of common sense. And I think there's so much that we can glean from educators like Tom and yourself, Mark, that to have him on the show sharing with us and answering our multitude of questions, as well as all of the questions hopefully that get fired in from the guests like Neil. I know Neil tweeted the other day, just to give him another shout out, he's got 1 to 20 questions himself lined up, ready and waiting. So I can't wait to delve into the show. So without further ado, let's get Tom in, Mark. Let's not waste any more time with just me and you. Let's welcome Tom to the show.
Brilliant, Tom. Welcome. Hi.
Hello. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's great to be speaking to you.
No, we're really, really pleased and grateful for you giving it your time to share with us today. We know how very, very busy your schedule is with all the work that you do. Where in the world are you today, Tom? Are you lockdowning? Are you?
I'm in my house in London, enjoying a day, one of many days, which was originally going to be a day somewhere, but is now a cancelled day, and it's another day at home. So yeah, I have quite a lot of these days working from home.
Do you find, I found when lockdown sort of kicked in back in March, a lot of my sort of face-to-face and in-school work sort of went from here to about here.
Yeah, totally. I've lost track of the number of cancelled days I had. It's a large number. Yeah, so, but actually, I found, as we'll probably talk about later, other ways of doing things. And I've actually discovered a way of sort of reaching, obviously lots of online training and working with Oliver Cavicchioli on walkthroughs, a whole other project. So I filled the time, but it's been a massive shift. Yeah.
Tom, I'll just sort of dive straight in with our first question. For any of our viewers that don't know you, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and then your experiences in education so far?
I started off as a physics teacher back in 1987. I think it was my first job in Wigan. And so I've had a whole series of jobs there since then, working in schools in London. And I moved up to being, say, a deputy head at one point. And then I went abroad to Jakarta in Indonesia for a few years, where I became eventually the head of the secondary school there, and then came back to England and worked in a couple of schools as head teacher. And then about 3 years ago, I stopped being a head teacher and became a full-time consultant. Initially, I thought of myself as a consultant for a while, visiting schools, but now I sort of think of myself more as a teacher trainer. So I sort of specialize really through most of my work is with teacher training, running CPD and writing about it. So that's kind of more how I see myself now. And I get invited to schools to deliver training, sometimes just one-off days and sometimes sort of a whole program of work. But it's all about classroom practice, really.
It's interesting you mentioned the differences there between how you engage with schools, Tom. Is that something that's sort of directed by the schools themselves when they contact you, or is it something that you try to promote with ongoing things? Obviously, turning up and delivering and sort of days often don't sort of lead to the most amount of impact. Does that? We had a little conversation about this beforehand, before we went live. Is that something that you sort of steer yourself, or do you have conversations with the schools? Is that something which is sort of granular and bespoke to each of the schools that you work with?
It's pretty varied. I think what happens is that I think people ask you because they feel they need some help. So if people feel they need a one-off input, then I'm not going to argue about that. But I do often have conversations about what the long-term strategy is for embedding things. And I suppose if I'm honest, when I get invited to do like a number of days with a school, I'm always happier because I feel like it's got more chance of really working. And some projects, I've got 4 or 5 projects which are much bigger, so sort of multiple days a year, and I sort of feel like part and parcel of the operation in a way, because they all know me and I know them, and we go. So there's lots of different levels. So it's everything from like a one-off hour webinar to a kind of 15 days regular work and everything in between. So it's quite varied. But yeah, I kind of, that's all sort of brokered between them. I'm not at the stage where I just say I only do this type of thing, and I kind of feel I'd lose that. What I love is when I get to see lessons. So my favorite thing to do is to work with a school where I get to watch teachers teaching in that context and work with the leaders and the teachers to sort of see what sorts of things might help them, rather than just sort of assuming I know what their issues are from an external perspective.
I love visiting classrooms and seeing teaching going on. For me, it's one of the sort of, people often don't realize that as somebody visiting a school, often you actually get good CPD back yourself, actually. I don't think there's ever been a single classroom I've ever been to where I haven't actually just picked up something, even if it's a great way to put up a wall display or to how to use, different sort of stationary items in the classroom. There are so many different ways in which you can learn new things just from visiting classrooms. It's something I absolutely love when I get to visit schools myself too. I want to dive down into a little bit about your personal interests, if that's okay, Tom. Because like me, I know you're really interested in music. In fact, I've just tweeted a pre-session photo with all of us showing off our different microphones before the session. But I know that you're really into music, and it forms one of your key interests outside of education. Firstly, could you share us a little bit about your music? And I say you're involved in a band, and you put music out and all of this.
This is not your sort of top favorite, your most favorite music genre, possibly, but yeah, I've been involved in bands since I was at school, since I was 15. So I think I've always been in a band at some stage. And the most recent one was just a friend who I worked with. He was a teacher, and I was a teacher in the same school. And it turned out that I could play the piano and he could sing, and so we kind of made some music together. And it got more elaborate. We did some studio stuff using GarageBand more recently, and we actually, in lockdown, we made an EP which is on Spotify called The Small Hours. It's a great thing. Look it up. And I would record the tracks on GarageBand, send him the file, and he would come up with the singing and the lyrics, and send back files of him singing to me, and I would stitch it back together again. And to me, they are the best songs in the world, obviously, because you get the thing about music where when you've made it yourself, you just think it's just the best thing. I don't know why. And then you put it out on Twitter, and like nobody cares. There's about 4 people who kind of are nice to me about it, and I love them for that. But mostly it's like nobody listens, and I'm fine with that. Every month I get an email from Spotify where it says, "This month you have had 16 listeners in total all month," which is crushing compared with like your blog stats, but it's fine. I've got used to that. But yeah, you need something outside. I mean, work. Work is a joy. I mean, I talk about education all the time, and I think about it a lot, and it's my great passion. But it can't be everything, can it? Or else you kind of just you're not a rounded person, and you can't just live a life. So for me, music is the main thing outside of education.
Yeah, that leads on to sort of second part of the question, Tom, in the importance do you place on having interests outside of education and school to the work you do in education? I guess if you're living and breathing it all the time, then it can actually get a bit too much and doesn't become that thing that you love and are so passionate about, I guess. Yeah,
I mean, I think, education's about celebrating kind of lots of interests. And I feel like the more interested you are in lots of different things, the more connections you can make, and just, it comes back into your teaching. I think it's just, people talk about the mental health aspect of it. That's important. But for me, it's just the kind of the natural thing to be interested in lots of different things. And then you can have better conversations with kids and with colleagues, and it all feeds in. Education is so it funnels it all into what you're doing. And I feel, if people don't have something, and their work becomes everything, it's not healthy, is it? But for me, yeah, definitely. I mean, some people do running and sport and everything, and I don't really. I try those things, but mainly it's the kind of the music.
I think Action Jackson tried to get me running earlier this year. We had a session like we've got here today, and to be fair, I did go out running a few times, but I am not built for speed. So yeah, music is definitely one of my sort of side passions as well. So great to hear your perspectives on that and how it relates to what you do, Tom. Thank you. Ollie, you ready for the next question?
Yeah, Tom, I just wanted to ask you, for schools engaging in the process of organisational development, and this book, Learning Rainforest, being a fantastic metaphor for great schools, what constitutes a great school in your estimation?
Wow, it's actually, when I saw that question, I thought it's absolutely huge, but because it's linked to the Learning Rainforest, I suppose I use the metaphor within it, which is the trees in the rainforest represent the individuals in the school, and the staff and the students. And so what you need to do is, in a great school, is create conditions for everything to thrive. So it feels like a great place to be. Like you want to be there, you want to learn there, you want to work there. So that's kind of nurturing, but it's also has a challenge to it. Like you feel like you're on something of a mission. You go there with a kind of sense of purpose. Then you need to sort of have a school which builds knowledge really well, so that where kind of the hard edge of, you know, the kind of technical aspect of teaching and curriculum design is really sort of really solid, so that you're really building secure foundations and making kids really succeed. But then the exploring the possibilities is also part of it. So for me, a really great school is where the knowledge building is so good that you're really seeing children fly off and explore things more with some agency and with some degree of freedom. And for me, all the best schools are at that stage where you reach the point where you are really, and every school is on its way to that. But it's when you really get there, you think, wow, this is amazing. Look at what the kids are able to do now with all the knowledge they've gained. So that's kind of the central, that's how the Learning Rainforest works. You've got the conditions, the knowledge, and then the possibilities. And it's sort of, I know several schools where I feel that's absolutely like living and breathing. You know, it just feels like every part of that is delivered so well. It just feels like an amazing place to work and to learn. You know, it has to be for the teachers and for the students.
So it's interesting you mentioned agency there. One of the questions we've got for you, Tom, relates to something I remember quite strongly from reading your blog for a number of years. And this is when you were working at the school in Chelmsford. I remember you talking and writing about then working with the students there to sort of co-create curricula within the school. The question is, do you think the idea still endures, given what you know now about working? And I guess it does, given the conversation we just had. But say one of those enduring memories from your blog was about this co-creation work you did with the students at the school in Chelmsford. Do you think the idea still endures now, given what you now know? I mean, cognitive psychology has come on so much since those. I mean, that was probably about 8 or 9 years ago now, I guess.
Yeah, I think it does, because I feel like, I'd say what I'd say now is that you need to be in the right place to do it from the perspective of being a priority for, say, staff development, because I feel like it's easy to do it badly, and therefore you need to. It's risky if you don't really have people who are able to deliver it with the rigor that it needs. But I'm still absolutely convinced that when you have the opportunity to do that, to do co-construction, as I would have called it, then it's really fantastic. And actually, to some extent, it's a bit of a kind of it's like a ruse in a way. You create the feeling of it, even if it's not as sort of co-constructed as it might seem. So, for example, if you just say to a group of 11-year-olds in year 7, you're teaching them a topic, and you say to them, "What do you think would be good questions to ask about this?" You know, and you get them to suggest things, and then you throw in a few of your own, and then what you do is you've created these sort of questions, and you start saying, "Fantastic! Those are really good questions." So what we're going to learn then in this unit is we're going to learn all about that. And actually, it's all what you're going to plan anyway, because they're totally predictable. But the students have got this sense of, hey, I'm involved here. This is something I get to think about. So you're sort of training them to think about what is worth learning and how to learn, rather than training them to just wait and be told stuff. So, and then you sort of, you throw them a few things like, yeah, so you select students to say, who thinks they could present something on this? And what I found is, if you don't expect kids can do things, they definitely can't. But if you say to a couple of students, do you think you could present on this next lesson? And that's a week away. And you give them some resources, then they really can. Kids can read, kids can read, learn, and tell their colleagues, their peers, about something that they've read about really well. And sometimes that involves them in it. It's so much built into that. And it doesn't take that much effort to really make that a part of the school culture. It's not really giving them huge power and huge responsibility. It's giving them an opportunity to participate in a way which is, quite structured. It's not all a big free-for-all. But when you get good at it, they're champing at the bit. They want more. Once they've had a taste of doing it, they really love it. And they want to, can I present on this? And can I do that? And can I read this? If they never get that chance, they sort of learn to just be sort of recipients. So definitely, I think it has value. You just need to be disciplined about it, and not just hope that it all just magically happens into some lovely thing. It really is you have to be quite strict. And one of the things I learned was, if a student is going to, say, for example, do a demonstration in science, you have to create the circumstances where if they don't prepare, it's a total disaster. You have to allow that to happen. Where's the stuff? What do you mean you didn't organize it? You haven't practiced. And you're kind of like, You have to train them that, no, it's really your thing. And if you don't do it properly and do it as I expected, it's not good. So they have to get ready and feel like it matters. And so you have to kind of like act all this stuff out so that it really matters. And the stakes are a bit higher then. So often people think they when they read about this, they think it sounds all sort of woolly, but to me, it never was. It was pretty intense. And that's one of the reasons I liked it. So yeah, I think more teachers should try it. Definitely. Still a total advocate for co-construction.
Yeah, I completely agree, and so I'm not in the classroom anymore, as you know. But it's something that I used to do with a lot of my learners, more sort of key stage 3 upwards. I was getting them to co-construct, co-create the various sort of assessment for learning type quizzes we do to check learning. And I used to work with Jim Smith, who's the lazy teacher, and so he would always sort of be putting on the independent learning strategy. Say, well, why are you spending all this time creating all these quizzes for your students? Why don't you get the students to make them? And then really, and what I found, it's a bit like what you were saying there. The students, they really want to catch their colleagues out. They want the questions the students used to come up with were far more difficult than any of the questions that I would come up with myself. They'd read around the topic, they find extra things to talk about, and the quizzes were really tough. And then if a student, they were all MCQs, so it wasn't like extended answer questions and things. But when they actually came to develop those questions and put them into systems like Socrative or Kahoot or whatever that they could then share with their peers, sometimes, and it would only ever happen once, but sometimes they'd actually put the response to the correct answer incorrectly within the quiz. Well, it only ever took one student in one class to get the question wrong, and for all of their peers to pick up on it, no student ever got those questions, their own quizzes wrong again because of that sort of the mistake they made in front of their peers. But you're absolutely right. They really get on board with it, and structuring it correctly can really be, again, give them real agency, can it?
You need to train them, and so because it has to start quite disciplined and structured so that they learn. But then, of course, then you can harness things. And then, for example, every time I've taught an exam class, which I've done, for years and years and years and years, you start off by, engaging them with the whole process. Like, this is the syllabus, this is what we're trying to do, and at any point, you should be able to say to a student, where are we? What have we done so far? What have we still got to do left? And they know because they're with you. They're checking it out. And you get students then saying, when are we doing this? Or when does this come up? Or and almost creating a little bit of pressure that they feel like they're anxious almost about knowing whether we're going to finish on time. And you sort of think, well, they should feel a kind of a sense of ownership of this. And they start making suggestions and resources. And then the other thing is to have, and you'll like this, I know this is a kind of one of my favorite experiences as a teacher was harnessing. In fact, I was showing this to some people a couple of weeks ago. It's just hilarious to me in this new COVID era. Like years ago, my classes all we had Edmodo, and I would have tech sidekicks, especially for Key Stage 3. So I'd always set up a lesson by saying, okay, guys, who's going to be the tech team this half term? Brilliant. Okay, you guys are the tech team. And so the tech team would do things like upload resources, take photographs of demos and put them onto Edmodo, write up notes, and you'd have all this sort of sharing going on. And so your students would feel like part of a class, part of a kind of community with each other and with me beyond the lesson, sharing things. And I used to think that was hugely valuable because it would save you loads of time. Like the students knew how to do it better than I did. I didn't even know how to use Edmodo really, that they did. So they would... And they had this world outside the classroom in social media, but in a controlled environment. That was a part of the co-construction, the sense of them having ideas. And even if only, say, I don't know, a third of the class were kind of genuinely sort of offering ideas that would help me with the teaching, that was enough because I was thinking, well, at least they've had that opportunity. If I hadn't created that culture, those students wouldn't have had that opportunity, and therefore they would have been sort of denied something which was possible. So I do think you need to manage it well. It's not, if you think of it as some woolly thing where it all just sounds great, it is, but it does take a lot of effort. And so therefore you need to have that capacity to make that effort. So if a teacher has got other priorities, for example, to worry about, I think, well, okay, this is probably icing on the cake at the moment. Don't push yourself down this path, but definitely see it as a possibility to get to work towards when you're ready for it. And you can have the greatest fun with the class when you feel this sense of community with them.
That's a great response.
Great, thank you. Tom.
Yeah, I love the shared ownership there. Tom, we've had a question come in from Neil. It says, loved your thoughts on Thinkpair Share at Research Ed Surrey in your recent blog. Could we hear a little bit more of your thoughts on getting everyone thinking?
Yeah, I'm really to this idea at the moment because, one of the things that we talked about at the beginning was what I do when I go to schools. I sit in the back of a lot of lessons. Like whenever I go into a room, I always go to the back, because that's what you do. So you're out of the way. And then you're in amongst all the kids who are often at the furthest reaches of the teacher's kind of, impact. And I notice this all the time. The students who are, they're trying to do the stuff, but they're not really making a progress in the way that the teacher kind of has in their hopes and dreams. And often it's because the tasks and the questioning don't make them think in a way which helps them build understanding. They either don't have the prior knowledge, so the thing that teachers making them think about isn't really there. They're confused about that already, and then they have to think about this new thing, and they're just thinking, well, hang on a minute, what about this? And they're still not even close to it. And that's happening a lot, much more than teachers sometimes can see. So it's sort of, and then sometimes, say with questioning, we have this sort of very common hope that what's happening is that knowledge kind of transfers from one thing to another. So if I hear someone over there talking about why they've multiplied out the brackets in this way or whatever, the teacher's hoping that everyone else is kind of with them, but often they just aren't. It's like there's a conversation over there that I'm not in, and I'm trying to follow it, but I'm not quite sure what's happening. And then the lesson's moved on. So I just think teachers need to be much more conscious of this issue all the time and be thinking, is everyone with me? Well, maybe they're not. So let's see. Can I get everyone thinking? Can I get everyone being sure of the basics? And so Thinkpair Share is one way of, for example, making everyone have the opportunity to kind of talk something through. So you might have just had a dialogue with one or two students or talked for a while. And I think it's the most normal thing to say, okay, in your pair, just like run through what you think you just heard. Like, what do you think this is about now? So you've got a breathing space to go, okay, well, I think what's happening here is this, and this. And I kind of can talk it out loud. So I have to think about it. And because I'm thinking about it, I can also then say, no, I don't understand it. Having thought about it, you know what? I'm totally clueless here. And that's a useful thing for a teacher to know about. Or it can just be, well, I think hearing some samples from that tells you as a teacher kind of the sorts of ways the students are processing the same idea. One of the things I do in my training is my favorite question to ask. I mean, there are others, but this is my absolute favorite one. This is my banker. Is why does the sun rise in the east? You ask adults that, and what I reckon I could make a book just from the answers people have given me to that question, because you've got adults, and like adults, we all know the sun rises in the east. It happens every day, and yet the way people explain it is so weird and wonderful. It's so varied. So you think in terms of schema building, everyone's kind of model for the sun and the earth and rotation and day and night and the sun rising is kind of in their own head, the way they see it. They bring something to it, and it's so instructive. Like, how do I make everyone think about this idea? I can't just tell them what to think. That's the thing. I have to make them think so that they then understand it. And I see that a lot. So Thinkpair Share has to have structure. You can't just say, guys, have a discussion. You have to make people think in a structured way so that they know what to do with that time. So the weaker the learners are, the less use they make of those minutes. So you have to say, try to put these things in the right order, or come up with 3 suggestions to improve this, or 3 advantages, and so they have to think of those 3 things in that time. So they have to give them a structure. And the other thing I think I'd say about this is, in terms of thinking, is in questioning, is the assumption that it is making people think rather than asking them to think. This is something I've found really interesting. So if I say to you, who can remember Who can remember how we explain how a waterfall works, in geography? Well, some kids are just not going to think. They're not thinking. They're just literally waiting for someone else to answer. Because every lesson, what happens is someone else usually answers. So they'll just wait, and eventually James, who always answers, and you go, see, I knew he'd answer. So you weren't really thinking about the waterfall thing. Whereas if the teacher says, right, here's a diagram, I've made 3 mistakes on it. I want you to find them, and I'm going to ask anyone. You don't have a choice. You have to think. You're like, oh, I've got to think now, and you're made to think. You're not being asked to think. You're being made to think, and there's an accountability that I could be asked. So you're going, oh, I could be asked, so I've got to think. What's the answer? And it makes you do it. So these things have a kind of an impact on the thinking. So that's kind of my message in this stuff is, are you making everybody think, or are you just hoping they think? And it's a big difference.
Some of that, Tom, jumping in, I know you wanted to ask another question, Oliver, so just to jump in and follow up, some of that goes to the sort of perennial issue of learned helplessness. And that's quite a big issue, which you could explore that as maybe part of the transition from primary to secondary or all sorts. But it's something that I've experienced, throughout my teaching career. Have you got any strategies that can sort of help push? I mean, you've alluded to some there, really, but I'm trying to draw a bit more out from you. Have you got any strategies to sort of like help push past that learned helplessness that some students can have in class?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there are some. You just need to create a culture where some things just happen all the time, so that they become norms. They become the routine, and they have to be focused on. Of course, there's behaviour norms, but there's also ways that we do learning. So things like questioning techniques, where no hands up, no calling out, that kind of thing. And so you make people sort of be on their toes the whole time. So at any point I could ask you to answer, but I could also ask you to check your understanding for what someone else said. So I also expect you to listen to what they are saying, things like that. And also things like whenever you do a task. So one of the things I think, if I was to say to you, like, we're going to do this learning activity, now, sometimes what people do, and I see this a lot, in fact, I think I wrote about this in my most recent blog, it's my pet peeve, is tasks which end with the neat book finished, like the task finished. A neat table, a well-drawn graph. So the conclusion is get it done. And then students learn very early on that as long as it looks like I've done it, I'm done. Whereas in fact, that isn't the end point. The end point is, do I now know it and understand it? And if all along your goal is, at the end of this task, you should be able to close your book and explain to me now how this works, or why this poem is better than this poem, or using all the words. So the goal is always the understanding and the learning, not the work. And with that, it makes you think all along, blimey, I can't just write this down. I've got to actually think about it and make sure I understand it, because I'm going to have to explain it without help. Just knowing that is coming makes you think much harder about it as you're doing it. And you can't just rely on, well, I've done my work, I've done my work. And I see that all the time, the neat table. It makes me cry. Like, I can sit in lessons of a subject I know zero about and do all the tasks with the students and think, that was easy, but I don't know anything. I've just done it, like just they have. And they, which order these go in? 1, 2, 3, 4. Bosh. Now stick it in your book. And they spend more time faffing about with making it all look neat in their book than they do actually thinking about what the order of the images is supposed to tell them. That literally happens every day in school. So you've got to think hard about this stuff. Don't make the goal the learning, not the finished product. And that's a simple switch to make, really. But it does mean you have to do that all the time. I could talk about that forever, so you better shut me up.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because Nicola Taylor, who's joining us, says that she does Thinkpair Share, and in her school they're currently 100% online, so I haven't harnessed this as much recently. Do you have any suggestions for Thinkpair Share online, breakout rooms or silent debate or anything else that you might know of, Tom?
I'm very keen, always keen to stress this. I'd be lying if I said I was an expert, but I'm not. And it does depend on the technology. So I've done quite a few sessions. In fact, last week I did 2 whole days with a group of staff from the same college doing sessions on Zoom. This was difficult. I found the cold calling brilliant because their names are there, and you ask people like so-and-so. So I'd be saying, Mark, what do you think? And then, that was actually almost easier than in a classroom, because the student, they're right in front of you, you call their name and they respond. Getting people to talk in pairs is harder when they're not even together. So I'll be honest, I don't know a good answer to that. I think breakout rooms are really tough because you can't monitor what's going on. at the same time. It's difficult. So I honestly don't know. I wouldn't even really, if I was teaching, I wouldn't try to create that. I think, because I just think it's too much. I just think it's too difficult, and I would rather focus on just the interaction I can sustain with the class that I've got, and give them tasks to go away, and then maybe invite them to discuss things with people close to them. Where I found training works well, and the only scenario I have seen work really well, is where the people themselves are together, but I'm not with them. And so I can say to them, right, you guys, now you go and have a conversation and then come back to me online. But I don't know how to do that when all the people are in separate spaces. So even when they're adults, I mean, have you ever been in a breakout room? Most of the conversation is about being in a breakout room. Yeah. Oh, we're in a breakout room. Is yours working? Are we on now? What are we supposed to be doing? Oh, is it me over? And it's like, you waste so much time actually talking about the very fact of being in a breakout room. So I sort of think they're kind of inefficient. So I'm sorry that's not a very helpful answer, but because I don't do this all the time like teachers do, I'm just really not an expert. So I feel like I'd be wrong of me to even profess too much knowledge.
That's right. Thank you for your response, Tom. And you've got another question.
I have, yeah, Tom. There's a fine line between consistency and constraints. What can you standardize for assessment, and then what principles would you demand from each department?
You're talking about assessment. There's a lot. I was at this question, it's like, well, my feeling is this: assessment needs to serve the needs of teachers in a subject so that they can teach better primarily. So of course there's a need for a school as a whole to sort of say, like, if I'm the head of a school, I want to know how are people doing, and I don't want to wait to the GCSE results to find out. I want to be able to say, is year 8 performing well as a whole, and who isn't, and why. But how am I going to know that? Well, what I need to know is that the teachers understand how to assess in their subjects, using tools which tell them what the students can do and what they know. And that's much more important than sort of some neat set of grades at the end of the year. So my absolute priority is to ask those heads of those departments to create assessments which tell them the information they need. And I think I think you can hold people to account on that if that's an issue. But so, for example, I learned this a lot in my last school, how variable assessment has to be. So if you're an MFL, the fact is that the kids do need to speak, listen, read, and write. There are 4 skills, and they all are important. And there's no point me imposing some regime on that's the same as in maths. Whereas in maths, they really just do tests. So you do tests of a certain set of question types, and you generate scores. And if you know what the test has on it, you collect the scores. That tells you kind of the sorts of things they can do and can't do, and so on. And in English, they do bits of writing, and writing has a quality model, and the marks are kind of more arbitrary. And so you want to know that within the subjects, everyone knows how to assess. So you get people close up to that. So the consistency is in the sense of everyone needs to understand their assessment mode that's most appropriate for their subject. And you get people to tell you what is the most useful assessment frequency and nature for your subject. So how often do you set tests? How often do you set marked assignments? How much marking do you need to do? And then they tell you, and then what you do is you say, right, just do that then. do that well. But it doesn't have to be the same. How could it be? How can you assess drama at the same frequency as English or maths when they have like 6 times as many lessons and stuff? So that's what I feel. Assessment that works is assessment which is authentic and close to the action of what kids can and can't do. And then, how often do you need to centralize that? Well, certainly annually, some general sense of how people are doing. Twice a year, what's the value of that second one? Well, it's only useful if you're going to do anything with the information. Even then, I'm sort of skeptical, but the most important thing is that you've got people holding hands with the departments and knowing what's going on. But as soon as you get teachers making information up to satisfy their leaders that they don't themselves need, I think you've made a mistake. If the data that you are generating actually isn't useful to you as a teacher, it probably shouldn't exist. That's what I think. That's the rule of assessment.
I guess it goes to that comment about asking that question here: who is this information actually for? And if it's not for a professional who's working with an individual to try and find out where they're at to help improve and push them forwards, then it's probably the wrong starting point. I would say based on what you said.
Definitely, and one of the things I've learned a lot about assessment was in a previous school where we were trying to do this sort of new level life without levels stuff at Key Stage 3, and we're looking at the different numbers that different departments had generated. And I was saying to the head of PE, I think it was, that I thought his numbers were a bit high. I was saying, compared with the other subjects, you've got way too many 7s and 8s or something, and so it looks like it's a bit inflated. And he said, well, what numbers do you want me to put? And I just thought, oh, that's interesting. Yeah. And I kind of realized that more or less that's what I've been saying to everyone else. Like, give me the numbers I want to get, and then I'll be happy. And that makes a nonsense of it, doesn't it? But essentially, that's what these systems are doing. They're just self-referential. I just thought he totally punctured my entire system in one sentence. Tell me the numbers you'd want me to. What numbers would you like me to give? And it's just a joke, isn't it? Just knock them down a bit. It's a nonsense way of of generating assessment. So I actually said, no, this is wrong, isn't it? How would you want to assess PE? And he had his whole other, he said, well, if it wasn't for this system, I'd do it like this. I said, well, you know what? That's probably what we should be doing then. Anyway, so you do need to think hard about these things.
It is difficult, and often common sense can get sort of pushed at the side, can't it? That's one of the things I love about the things that you share, Tom. It's just so much common sense. I've got a question for you, and it's interesting to say Ollie's a physics teacher, and this comes from a physics teacher as well. He's, and we mentioned the school earlier, he's the head of science from the British School of Muscat. In his presentation on Friday, he was talking about growing and developing capacity within his team. And so this question sort of links into what he was talking about on Friday at the conference. And so the question is that middle leaders are often referred to as the engine of the school. They are often squeezed for time themselves. They're trying to sort of manage the expectation from SLT on them whilst trying to develop capacity from within. So how can senior leaders help build capacity for middle leaders so that they can develop a richer curriculum and support their team?
Well, I think the first thing is to make sure it's explicitly a part of your plan. So, in fact, I had this conversation with a multi-academy trust board, leadership team last week, where we were talking about their CPD plan. I think you need to, you're planning your CPD process. You need to have something explicitly tailored for middle leaders. They need to have their own development process for themselves, and most of which is about how they run their teams. So, it's one of those paradoxes. It can't take up so much time that if they feel they'd rather be with their team, but they still do need you. And sometimes it's through really good line management. It depends on the culture of the school. But I think whether it's done with other middle leaders together or just through like really good line management, every middle leader needs to have be explicitly developed so that they can do things like coach other teachers, run good meetings, run meetings like their CPD, engage with curriculum development, and so on. And I think the more that the leader gets to know the issues that the middle leader is dealing with, the better. So you get to learn the curriculum. I always think it's a mistake when like SLTs rotate line management constantly, so that you never really get to know. And I found that the more stable that is, the better. Over the years, I mean, one of the things I'd say I sort of pride myself on it, but it's just this, I feel fortunate really, is that I've learned how to assess, how to talk to every other curriculum subject. I could have a good chat with any subject leader because I know enough about their curriculum to kind of have a meaningful conversation. But the challenges they have are, say for example, like last week I was doing these curriculum masterclasses, and one of the things that came up constantly was well, how do you find the time? And I was saying, well, you need time. So you need to have a CPD calendar, which says, a CPD calendar says, these are the slots which are safeguarded for curriculum development. And that's what they're for. They're not for anything else. We're never going to rob from that time. So a middle leader knows at the start of the year, I've got these times, all these times for me and my team to do curriculum development. And then I can plan that time according to our needs. If you don't know when that time's coming, or you always feel like you're begging and borrowing it, it's stressful. You think you have to do the extra on top. It needs to feel like it's there, like sitting there with a big label on it. Curriculum development time. And everyone's going, great, we've got like 10 hours this year to really sort of thrash out these issues, or whatever it is. It could be more or less, and it feels safe. And that's what you need. So, but then some people don't know how to use that time. I found that, a good middle leader will probably really know how they could use any minute you gave them. But some people find that hard they think, God, I've got a whole hour with my team. What's the best way to use an hour? And even that is a CPD issue. You've got to make sure people know how to use those hours. And so there's lots to do with it, but the main thing is that time is a scarce resource. So let's really make sure it's properly portioned out. And I keep doing this with my hands because it has to be spread out. You can't just say, "Oh, we'll do a day," and then like off you go. It's got to have a rhythm to it.
That sort of strikes me as being very similar to what we do with children. We don't expect them to turn up to one lesson and then expect to know everything and be brilliant at all of it in one go. It's about supporting over time and revisiting it and through all manner of different things, isn't it? It's not. That's something that I've sort of come to realize as I've sort of grown in my career, is that the way we work with children is actually sometimes the best way to work with adults in terms of supporting them and developing them, because humans are humans. We all learn, the science behind learning works with a 35-year-old the same as it does with a 5-year-old, 10-year-old, 15-year-old, and so forth and so on.
Definitely. And I think, and you need to, I suppose people need to be open to getting a bit of feedback. I mean, I've sat in some curriculum meetings where the head of department got out his development plan spreadsheet on the screen and was saying to people, which of these things can we tick off? And I was thinking, are you really making everyone like review your development plan like this? Surely there's other more pressing things, like, do we all know how to explain this topic, or how do we get these students to be more successful? And do the stuff that needs to be done, not talk about when you're going to do it. Like, you haven't got time for that. You don't need to use team meetings for things like that, but sometimes people do, because they sort of bring their own admin into it. Another sort of thing I see a lot is a middle leader who sort of slightly misguidedly thinks, what I want to do is everyone share like tricks and tips. So every CPD meeting feels like people just sort of saying, oh, I like doing this and I like doing that, and here's a thing you might try. But at the end of the session, you're thinking, well, okay, what I've heard in the session is 8 things that I might try. But am I ever going to try any of them? Well, no, because I'm already busy with these other things I'm doing. So I think you need to be much more strategic. You need to sort of, as a middle leader, you need to filter out from your enthusiastic people the sorts of things that are possible options for focusing on. But in the time you've got with your teams and saying that these are the things that we're going to focus on, and create a culture of focus. We're going to keep working on this until we're better at it. And even though there's like 5 other options that we might try, we've already decided that we're going to focus on these. So I am sort of skeptical of the kind of 5-minute showcase and the 10-minute teaching and learning briefing, which is just adding more and more and more things to the list of things that teachers can't absorb because they're already heads exploded with things they're already trying to do. And you know what I mean? So I think, well, let's filter that out, but let's be a bit more sustained with the things we've already. Don't fall into the thing of, oh, we did that last year, so now we have to do something new this year. Well, no, not necessarily. Maybe what's a really good decision is to do exactly the same stuff we did last year and do it better this year.
We've had a suggestion come in, just to go back to a previous question about Jamboard. Nicola's saying that Jamboard and Pedder are useful tools for trying to get students discussing content in lessons. I know that also watcher of the show and supporter Linda loves your tech helper comments, and I know that she would probably back me up in this, that OneNote in the collaboration space is a pretty useful tool for that, because you can restrict access to certain students, and then they can provide voice notes, or if they're in a breakout room, they can actually discuss the content as they collaboratively work on it. So 2 suggestions there. We've also had a comment come in from a long-time supporter of the show, Mark Ryan. He says, you need to trust that people will use their time in effective ways, and then followed that up with, it's all about a culture of focus, which really resonates with me. That I think you've got to make the main thing, as both of you have talked many times. I've
often said that when I'm talking to SLT, like if you're in a team meeting, every department meeting is happening at the same time, and I say to a head, well, which of the meetings do you think are happening from really well? Like, you just don't even worry about them, and which ones are you thinking, God, I hope that's going okay? And then you think, well, what's your information? What's that hunch based on? And sometimes it's just based on not no information at all. Sometimes it's because of other reasons. So you think, okay, so already those are the guys that you trust to get on with it, and those are the guys you need to help with, and you need to be sensitive, you're flexible. It's something you like. Was it Jamboard? That's the second time I've heard of that in a week. So maybe that is a good shout.
It's a really good tool for using Google Schools. It's a sort of Google-centric product, and facilitates breakout rooms. It's a whiteboarding tool. You can use it for presenting all sorts of stuff. But it's in many ways, it's very similar to Padlet, and it's a really collaborative space. But it's better than Padlet in some regards, because you can do so much more. You can sketch on it. You can take photographs and drop. Yeah, it's Padlet, but with a few more bells and whistles, really, Tom. Okay. If you're aware of Padlet.
Yeah, I'm sort of vaguely aware of that, but that sounds interesting.
We've got a great question here as well, Tom, from Dee. She says, there's the assumption that leaders know how to develop the curriculum at Key Stage 3. Where would you point middle leaders to understand how to build and map out a curriculum?
Well, it's funny that question, because I think what I would say is that in every curriculum subject, there are examples of really good practice. And one of the things I would say is sort of look for examples. There are subject communities, for example, like on Twitter, and obviously professional bodies, associations for subjects, which are probably, between those 2 avenues, you could probably find examples of lots of good curriculum models. And one of the things I've done, like for example, if I'm researching primary curriculum, I go onto school websites and I raid their curriculum tab. Like, you find the curriculum tab on. Think of a school that you think is great or that you know of. Go to their curriculum tab on their website, and sometimes just from that you just think, oh wow, look at this, look what they do. It's so awesome. And it's just, people have got this unbelievably good resources for their parents on their websites, and you see their planning laid out. And once you've got 3 or 4 of these, you start seeing, like, okay, that's interesting. They do that and they do that, and so you start forming ideas about what you're doing. So that's something I would say. Like, you don't guess from scratch. Go to the sources of expertise, and talk to people. Find people who you can talk to, who feel they've got some knowledge and confidence around it. And I would really work hard on that, because then you've got someone who can say, well, this is our whole rationale for, say, geography at Key Stage 3, and this is what we do. And you can learn from just the way that they've set it out. And I've learned that myself as a non-specialist in lots of subjects. I've found looking for resources that other schools have already made incredibly useful. So that's what the main thing I do. And then you feel like you're learning a lot from them, and then reference it to what you're already doing, and you go, okay, well, that's all right, because we're doing that already, and most of what we're doing is sound. So you end up with a kind of agenda for change, which isn't so massive, but you get inspired by certain ideas. Anyway, I think that's the main. I have this sort of thing I call in my training on this sofa theory, which is that when you're buying a new sofa, you don't design your sofa from a blank sheet of paper. You go shopping, you go and look to see what sofas are available. And when you're doing that, you realize there are some you like more than others. And you realize you have taste in sofas that you didn't realize you had, and you learn. And that's the same with curriculum ideas. You can actually, by comparing things, you learn the sorts of things that you value and don't value, but you do need to see examples. So it's not a conversation about basics is a conversation about some fairly rounded programs which have already been established, and then you can learn to understand why they're there.
We've had a question come in from David Pedder, who is a massive advocate for professional partnerships and professional learning. Is there a role for students to work with teachers building that map for a curriculum?
I think that only where they would add to it in a way which is really sort of genuine, and I think that's quite rare. I mean, it could be, for example, if you're talking about faith and ethics, and you've got students from a range of faith backgrounds, and so that they really are almost a resource in themselves to everybody else, then you would say, they might know more about this faith in practice than I do, and you're going to bring their experience into it, for example. But if you're talking about maths or something like that, it's probably unlikely. But you can, for example, I found the more sophisticated the students are, when you've got, say, choices, you can sort of say, well, where would you like to go next? And when there's arbitrary decisions, you could say, should we do this or should we do that? If you genuinely feel either path is perfectly sound in terms of the curriculum flow, getting students to feel they've made some choice can be useful. And it's more at the sort of nitty-gritty thing. So and I still think it's curriculum, but it's more niche. So if you were to say to students, what products could you make to show this knowledge? And that's the thing I think is safe. So one of my favorite things, I always share this when I'm doing curriculum CPD, is examples where students have made products to showcase their understanding, where you don't have to mandate what they are. So they make a multimedia resource of some kind or an artifact. And because you've given them the choice of what to make, they're sometimes incredibly creative, and you find all sorts of things that they can make, like websites or videos or stuff like that. And that is part of their curriculum experience, but it's not sort of much at the level of what should we teach. I just don't know. I think you need to be quite careful about that, assuming students know enough to make really secure curriculum decisions. But sometimes there are some arbitrary things that they can, there's some preferences. Another thing is when you've got lots of students going off to find something out which they then bring in. So it could be, I've done this with, say, weird animals, like evolutionary stories, like plants and animals, which are just incredible. And students come in and say, I found this like weird undersea thing, and they can tell you all about it. And everyone's got a different weird animal that they're showcasing. And that is part of the curriculum, but you've sort of controlled it, but they still feel like their bit matters and they've brought it in. It's that type of optional thing, I think, is where it's most powerful.
Well, Mark Ryan's joining us again with some interesting comments here. He said there's two weird animals in this group. I think he's referring to myself and Ollie there. Thank you so much for that, Mark. Cheers. Welcome. David has come back and said, yeah, agree, the involvement needs to be genuine. Perhaps there are choices from an existing range of content that students can influence. This is Professor David Pedder from the Emirates College for Advanced Education. It was our guest last week on the show, Tom. And so fantastic to have him join us again this evening. And Dee follows up by saying that she loves the idea some of her departments at Dubai College are working with heads of department to review topic choices at Key Stage 5. So it's great to see that sort of conversation going on around in the chat as well. Thank you so much, Tom. Time absolutely flies. We've got time for two more questions very quickly. The first one is a standard, second one's a standard question we ask every single week, which Ollie will ask you in a second. But I was going to ask you this one here. Given your experience in education, if you could go back in time, what three pieces of advice would you go back and share with your NQT self?
I've been thinking about this one. I would say to them, I'd say to my AQT self, like, just kind of do what you're doing and just sort of enjoy it, because it's not a ladder. Like, you'd have to sort of worry about the future. Just make the most of it, like have fun with it. Because I used to do some quite wild things when I was an AQT, and I would say, yeah, just don't worry about anyone says, just do those things, because time will come later where you kind of can change. I'd also say, perhaps a bit later on than AQT, because I moved from a tough comprehensive school after about 3 years. I would say to people, look, the emotional side of behavior is something you can deal with. And you do need to sort of take a step back sometimes, and don't chase kids down the corridor because they've been rude to you. Just use the systems. Don't get emotionally involved. Use the systems. And so I could think of a third one, but those are the main things I'd say. It's like, you know, carry on it being experimental and make the classroom your own, but also, yeah. And then also, I think in terms of career, don't rush it. Like for me, what I've learned since then is that a long career in education has many phases, and you have job 1, job 2, job 3, and they don't have to sort of be climbing. They can just be different. And I think I found that quite useful to think about, that over a long career in education, you can do lots of different things at different times for a few years at a go, and that's good. That's healthy.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tom. Ollie, over to you.
Yeah, I'm just going to bring up Neil's comment here. 1 more hour. I would love 1 more hour. We've actually only got half of our questions for you.
Well, come on again. I'll do another one. I'll be more than happy.
That would be
that'd be absolutely fantastic, Tom. I'll get you booked in.
Our last question, we ask every guest 1 of 2 kind of stock questions. So the one I'd like to pose to you, Tom, please, is can you recommend a non-educational book that's had a positive impact on you as an educator or leader?
A non-educational book that's had a positive impact on me as a leader. I find this quite difficult, actually, because I suppose most of the books I read are about education. But I suppose the book that I've read most recently, which is I think has made me think really hard, is a book called Blacklisted by Geoffrey Boitier, who was a teacher and was a head of English, used to work at School 21. And he's written this book, Blacklisted, and it's all about all the different categories that are used to describe Black people, BAME, Afro-Caribbean, Black British, and how each one of them is really complicated and needs subtle understanding and has different emotional impacts on him as a person. So to me, that was just totally eye-opening, that some things you take for granted about labels, you just can't take for granted. It's a really amazing book, actually. So I really recommend that. Brilliant
stuff, Tom. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. As you've heard from us and from our audience tonight, your session with us has been really well received. The sort of chat's been going on. We've had so many lovely conversations going along on the side. And just thank you to you, Tom, for your time, and thank you so much to our audience for joining us. We're here each and every week on Mondays from 5 p.m. till 6 p.m. British Standard Time, UK time, and 8 until 9 p.m. GST, Gulf Standard Time, for Learn Live UAE. Did you want to mention what we got coming up again, Ollie, before we disappear?
Which was that?
Yeah, just make a note in your diaries, ladies and gentlemen, for our live session from guests. Get yourself signed up to guestleaders.com, where you can join us. Tom's looking over the top, see if you can see the front side there, look. And 24th, 25th November, guestleaders.com. But that's, I think, from myself and Ollie, is it for this week's episode. Tom, please stick around for a second after our little outro video. But thank you so much, everybody, for joining us for this special episode with Mr. Tom Sherrington. Thank you very much.
Thanks.